Hi, welcome back to Art by Brooke. For today's video, I wanted to show you one of my favorite techniques for art journaling and mixed media projects. I usually call this the credit card method, though I'm more than likely using a gift card. So I guess technically this should be the gift card method. Often when I'm going on a trip and I really want to art journal, but I don't want to bring a ton of tools, I make sure that I have some sort of gift card, my art journal, some paint, and some writing utensils, and usually some glue. So why is this so handy? Well, when you use this to scrape paint across the surface, you can scrape the paint really, really thin, so even though it's acrylic paint, it can dry almost immediately. This is great for traveling if you're not comfortable with drawing with pencil or crayon, things that are traditionally a little easier to use when you're on the go. So you can still use your acrylics and not have to wait forever for them to dry. This is a technique I think a lot of people have already seen before or used, but I was talking to my cousin the other day and trying to explain this technique and realized I didn't have a video about this in my tips and tricks section on my channel. I totally thought I did. I think a long time ago I had made a video for someone and shared it to them, but I think that was before I had a channel. So let's jump into it. I have some scrap paper here and I am going to show you how to use it on here, and then I'll give you some examples of what it can look like once you've been building up some layers of color. And then we will do a quick page in my art journal so you can see how that looks as well. So let's start with one color. You just lay out a little bit, and a little bit goes a long way. So you take your credit card or gift card, and of course this probably goes without saying, but don't use one that you're still planning to use at the store. It's actually a good idea to write void on any gift cards that you've used up, and that way you'll know which ones are which if they ever get mixed up. So you take your gift card and you put it on the opposite side of the paint. So whichever hand you use. So I'm right-handed, but if you were left-handed, you could put it on this side and pull this way. So I'm putting it on this side and holding it tight to the paper and pulling the way that's comfortable. I'm still holding it quite tight to the paper. And you can see I still have a ton of paint on here, so I can come over here and continue it. And there's some paint here, but we'll get that in a minute. So holding it pretty tight. The cards are great because they're kind of flexible. And I still have some paint. I'm actually going to collect some of this here and come down here. And if you have a little bit like that, you can kind of see where there's excess paint and go here and fill that in. Now this is a really cool technique because each layer will kind of lay over itself and you'll get all these cool effects of seeing the different layers peeking through each other. So even with one color, you're going to get some cool effects. So there you can kind of see. And it's hard to show you on here, but parts of this are already very, very dry. Some of it's a little bit wetter where I've overlaid, but it doesn't take very long for that. So you just set it aside and you should be able to come back to it pretty quickly. And it would all be dry if I had just kind of done it thinly across the whole thing, but I kind of layered a little bit. So as you can see, I've done this on some other paper, and you'll notice when I'm doing my art journaling videos, I tend to put a piece of paper behind my page so that if I do this technique or do any kind of mark making, it doesn't go to the next page, it just goes onto my scrap paper. This is really cool because if you just keep some scrap paper around, you can collect them and continue using them, and eventually you can get some pages that would be really fun to use in collaging. So I'm just going to show you a couple right here. So here you can actually see where it sat in my book. You can see kind of where the page was, and I must have scraped this way, and you can see this color. Now that's gorgeous. I think this is phthalo blue. That's my favorite blue, and it really looks nice in this technique. This might be the golden acrylics. That one in phthalo blue tends to be beautiful. So you can also see I kind of like cleaned off some stamps here, and here I wiped off my credit card when it had some extras. So you can see it starting to layer up. And I'll probably keep this one around for a little while to get some more color over here. You can see some of this. This is so pretty. I love it when you can see two colors layering over each other. And then actually there is a third color coming through, but you can see where they kind of overlap and you get these cool shadowy effects. And I will use both sides. So you can see I started to use this side as well. And that's really fun because once you kind of rip it up for collage, you can check to see which side you like better. And once you have built up your color the way you like it, and you've ripped up your pieces, here's what they could look like. Here's one that I kind of used parts of and just kind of glued down some scrap on top. And this will I'll probably use this still and get some more color on there. But I definitely must have used part of it. Here's a section that I used. You can see both sides. And love this. I love all these colors peeking through. Here's another piece that I cut out. It has both sides. This was some bubble wrap that had been dipped in paint. And then here's some leftover pieces from a mixture of this technique and some sort of stencil. So these would be great ripped up, glued into your art journal page. Here's an example of probably a piece from this. It looks like the same color. Here are some other examples of using that background in one of my pages. You can see how it just adds some really cool texture. And this was actually done on a ripped up phone book page. Here's just one more example. Just a bunch of little pieces that have paint on them. You can see this one has kind of a chartreuse layered over blue, which looks so pretty, especially with the pops of orange. So while I've been talking, this is mostly dry. It's still a little bit damp, so I wouldn't want to immediately put this between a book or anything like that because it could stick, but we can layer some more colors over it. I'm going to lay this underneath so that if any comes off the edge, it'll go onto this. So here I'm going to lay down a couple of colors. Bringing in some of that blue again. So now I have 3 dots of color, and again I will put my card on the other side of them and pull. And you can see how cool that is. You get the 3 lines. Now I still have some left, and I can try to go back here and do more. And you can see where the paint's a little thicker here than it is here. So that's going to take a little longer to dry. Or I could go right back over that again and push a little harder to spread that out a little bit more. And I can go down here again and spread out some more. So that's a cool way to get some stripes of color in. And it looks super neat, especially where you kind of get some of the edges going over top of each other. Now I'm going to go ahead and just clean off my card on this page. I always keep at least 2 around. One is usually the one that's right behind my art journal page, and then another one is for cleaning off my tools. I love how that blue and purple look together. It kind of looks like a gradient, and you can even see it here on the card. So I'll have to remember those colors together. And remember that if you're going to have colors on top of each other or next to each other, you will get more muddy colors if they are more on opposite sides of the color wheel from each other. So good combinations are colors that you know together make another color. So for example, purple and blue together would just make more of a bluish purple color. So those would be good next to each other. Blue and green will make more of a yellow color. So you will likely like what happens in between those colors. Now I purposely tried not to cross green and purple over each other because those could make a more muddy color. Since you are pulling them so thin, most likely you won't get much, but in the overlap here you can kind of see this brownish yellow color. That's because the 2 colors went over each other. So totally depends on what you're trying to do, but just keep that in mind. I'm going to set these aside so I can show you some of the other techniques on a clean white background. But as you know, I'm going to keep these around and continue adding colors until I want to use them in a collage. This technique does not need fully clean paper, so you can use paper that has had things printed on that you don't want anymore. Just be aware that if there's personal information on there, you wouldn't want to publish that online. Okay, for this next variation, we're using two colors that look good with each other, so orange and red. Take one color and do a thin strip. You always run the risk when using red that if you get it on your hands, it'll look like you're bleeding. I promise I'm not. So you take your second color and do another thin strip right next to it. Doesn't have to be touching, but having them separate versus touching would create different effects, so you can kind of experiment and see. And the longer you let them sit, the more defined the difference between the two will be. So I like to try to work pretty quickly. So again, taking the card, pressing and holding it tight, and pulling this across. So you see the two defined lines here, but they kind of get mixed throughout, and you see it on here too. So I can come down here and pull this across. And now I can use this on the rest of the page. And it's so pretty. Now you can cover all of it like down here, or you can let it do some of these cool texture effects up here. That's where you're kind of losing the amount of paint that's on the card, and it pulls and leaves gaps. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my card on this one. And before setting the card on something that you care about, always double check, because depending on which hand you're using and how hard you press in certain areas of the card, they wear down a little differently. So you may think you've cleaned it off, but there might still be some paint on one side. So just be aware of that. You can even keep a paper towel nearby to kind of wipe it off. But I like using up all of the paint on something that I'll use later in a collage. So just kind of do a couple swipes over, and always make sure you get the edges too. And my favorite part is this is now almost completely dry, and so I am ready to rip this up and start collaging it right away, which is very fun. You don't have to wait too long for anything to dry. And by using only two colors, we got tons of depth, and it looks like we used 3 or 4 different colors. So there are so many techniques and so many ways you can use this, but I'm just showing you a few to get you started, and then you can kind of start figuring them out as you go. So one more way that I've seen this used is you take your paints and you just do some dots. And then you take the next color and do some more dots. And then one more, and this gets a little hard because these caps can accidentally go through your paint, so just be careful about that. You might need to work a little bit quicker with this technique because they will dry pretty quickly since they're really small dots. So go ahead and get started right away. And you just pull like usual, and you're going to get some blank spaces as well. And then with this one, if you want them all to look like this, you want to clean your card off in between, which is great for your background paper because it's going to look very pretty. You could even have a second paper off to the side for excess cleaning. Or you could have a second card. So I'm going to go back, pull up here, and pull down, and then clean and continue. So what you end up with is a super neat kind of lava lamp looking effect. And you can even see some of the dots where the paint was sitting for a little while and the outside edge had a little bit of time to dry. And this effect would look cool even just with one single color, because in the areas that one color would cross over itself, it'd be a little darker in those areas. And I bet you could do just blue for raindrops. You could even do like a gradient of colors where you have light blue, medium blue, and a dark blue, or replace that with your favorite color. So now that we have some of these techniques down, I just want to show you how I do it in my art journal. And I'm just going to go ahead and cover one of my pages and let you see how that looks in a journal. So because I'm right-handed, often pulling from the middle of the book to the right is easiest for me. So when I want to do a left side of the page, I will often turn my journal upside down so that I can pull this way. And again, you make sure you put your paper in between so that you don't get paint on your other pages. My big warning for this is to make sure when you're done covering the page to double check which orientation your book needs to be in. I do have one art journal page that I accidentally did upside down. Now that can be really fun, but just in case that would bother you a lot, be aware of that, because you might get in the mode of journaling and just kind of finish it, really love the colors, jump right in, and then it's totally upside down, and then maybe it messes with your day. Personally, I would take it in stride and just kind of consider it one of the more interesting things of your art journal, but go ahead and do with it what you will. So when I am pulling the paint across here, I want to make sure to go with a little bit less is more of an idea, because if you cross the page and have a ton of paint on your card, there's a chance that it could kind of come on here and then get under the page and touch your other page. That can be very frustrating. So definitely try this technique out on blank pages to start with until you're comfortable with it, and be aware that that can sometimes happen. This paint is a little old, so it's a little clumpy in parts. So I can tell already this is probably more paint than I needed, because this heavy body especially spreads a ton. But I will have my scrap paper here and ready to go so I can wipe off my card in between. You could also wipe off your card on your opposite page if you'd like. Then you can just build color onto that later for another page. I have a second paper here to wipe off the excess color. I like to try to get all the way to the inside edge, but that will depend on your journal and your preference. And because I chose colors that look good together, I am going over them multiple times. But if you chose colors that could create brown together, then you wouldn't want to go over them too many times unless brown is your intended goal. It is a little hard to get used to the curve of an art journal that has already been worked in. So be aware it's going to feel a little weird when you are used to doing it on flat paper. Okay, I think I like that coverage. I'm going to clean off my card. As you can see, there is definitely a ton of extra paint. And then I'll come back and do a couple of extra things. Okay, so I am done with that. I ended up needing a page and a half because that was a lot of paint. Now I'm just going to go to the middle and make sure that there's no giant clumps of paint, because sometimes it can pool in the middle. Not really pool, I guess that's more of a liquid term, but it can kind of clump up in the middle when you're going in there. There's some right in here. And yeah, I got some out, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe that off. And now I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Some of my color went over to the other side, but luckily it was pretty minimal. Let me see if I can show you. There's a tiny bit over here and a tiny bit there. And if you ever do this technique and leave it and then find that your page is stuck to the background because of that line of paint, one thing you can do is kind of get your card under here and gently slide it, and that'll probably help pop it up from your paper. But it's best, if you can, before it's fully dry, to pull this up and maybe even take it out, because in this case there's some clumps on the edges, and put in another piece. So there. Now I know that what's on here isn't going to spread to here as well. And I'll set that aside a little bit. So it hasn't even been more than a couple of minutes since I did this page, and it's already mostly dry. There's a couple of little parts where there were bumps in the paper already from this page, and the bumps can collect some paint. It's a great look because you get this really cool texture, but just remember that it's a little bit more damp in those areas. So be careful about shutting your book before this is fully dry. When I use this technique, I often will do 2 pages, and by the time I'm done putting down the color for the background of the second page, the first page is dry and ready to start working on. You could also even have a second art journal that you use to wipe off all of your tools every time you use them on all the different pages. Then when you're done with the first art journal, you can start in the second one. There's already texture and color and everything to start with. That doesn't really work with my style because I like to go with colors that fit my mood for the day, but I know some people really like the other way of having something down as kind of a jumping off point to start on. Now that you've seen the technique, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the tool. If this is something you know you want to try, I would recommend starting to save your old gift cards, or if you have friends and family who might have gift cards, let them know you're looking for them. It has been years since I've actually asked people for these, and I still occasionally get people saving them for me because they know I use them. Another thing you could try, if you don't know anyone who has gift cards, is next time you're shopping in a store like Target, when you check out, if it's not a really busy time, you could ask the cashier if they have old, used up gift cards. You could let them know you need a couple for an art project, and would they be willing to give you any that they planned on throwing away anyway. Some people might be suspicious about this, or some may just not have any because they've already thrown them out. But I've gotten lucky at a couple different places where they had a couple, or sometimes they had a lot. So when I was looking to teach art journaling classes, that really helped a lot because I was able to get quite a few. You also may be surprised because some places will give you a handful and you may have ones with different textures. So it's kind of hard to see, but this one has like a rippled edge to simulate those flowers. So that would definitely create more texture because anywhere that the ripple is out further will pull the paint thinner, but any of the lower parts will leave some paint in streaks. So that's something you can experiment with. That may not work as well for trying to make a page that can dry quickly, but it definitely would make a fun technique. There are also rounded ones as well, and as you can see, I wrote void on this one so I would know. Also, if you know someone who travels a lot for work, you could have them save some of their room keys. Another way to get something like this is I occasionally get junk mail that comes with cards. So this is just an Xfinity thing. It actually has a perforated edge, so I could pop this card out and use it. Now it's a little bit more flimsy than the gift cards, but it would definitely work. It's plastic coated. I've even used ones that were more papery. They just don't last more than a couple of times. This one's fun because you could experiment with using a large size one of these and see if you could cover the whole page. And basically you can use anything with a flat, hard edge. So you could use a lot of these other tools too. And a lot of people do. So these are palette knives. These are made for spreading paint. So often you can grab a couple of these for a pretty good price at Michael's, Joann's, sometimes even dollar stores. And these are really fun to use in your art journal as well. When I first got palette knives, I wasn't sure what to do with them because I don't do a lot of painting on canvas with tools. But I've been able to use these in art journaling because I already had a technique that I like and that these work for. So it's a good way to kind of learn some of your tools as well. Another really great use for your scrap paper that has all kinds of colors and paint on it is to get a paper punch and punch out shapes from the dried scrap paper. So some of these are from magazines and some of them are from other things, but you can see I have some that have that excess paint on them. And they turn out so neat, and these are great for collages or for adding some interest to your pages. So I hope you learned something new from this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell so that you get a notification every time I post a new video. That way you won't miss anything new, and I really appreciate the support. I'm sure there are other really fun ways to use gift cards, so if there's something I missed that you love doing with a credit card and some acrylic paint, leave it in the comments down below. And if I get some cool suggestions in the comments, I will pin one of them at the top so you can see it and maybe try it for yourself. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.